This is not a fictional story. This is an account of what happened to me when I was young. It was a normal day in County Kerry in Ireland. Well, what the rest of the world would consider be normal. The likes of you reading this will probably have a job of some vague description or be in some form of education. Not me. I'm a free spirit. I do not or did not when it happened attend school. I left early because school just wasn't for me. Let's leave it at that. I was more of a hands-on kind of person. I'm not saying I'm stupid because I'm not. It's just I had a different sort of intelligence than that which was demanded by the education system. Myself descending from an agricultural background, and I'll tell you this, strange things happened out in the country, strange, eerie things. Growing up in Ireland, I of course heard my fair share of folk tales told to me by my dearest mother, God bless her soul. Tales warning me not to disobey my parents or else a tall man will get me. But that's not what this is about. I grew up listening intently to these folk tales because that's what they were to me back then. Tales and fables, just stories. I'm not sure if you readers are aware of one of the Ireland's most famous folk tales. Forgive me if I get it wrong. A creature known only as a Banshee. I'm 17 now, but when it happened I was around the age of 12. It was a normal day to me and my little sister, who shall remain nameless out of respect. We were playing out in the fields one late afternoon. The winds of Ireland swept across the barley, created waves across the land which rippled in various shades of gold and yellow. The sun was starting to retreat back to the horizon, illuminating the world in rich shades of purple and orange. As usual, me and my sister were playing hide and seek in the fields, and me being the older brother, I tended to opt for the seeker, just so I could see her smile when she laughed as I found her. On the verge of the field were the woods. Even when the sun cast celestial vibrancy upon the woods, it still remained dark and foreboding. Anyway, we were playing hide and seek when I noticed something just on the rise of the field before it dipped down again. It was like a black bag. That's the only way I could really describe it. Just kind of floating there at the bulge. I dismissed it, assuming it was just farming waste like something had fallen off a tractor. As I continued searching for my little sister, she was an excellent hider, and some days I wouldn't even find her at all, causing my mother to panic rather frequently. Through the barley, this black bag thing managed to keep itself fixed in my peripheral vision. Again, I dismissed this, thinking it was the cause of the wind fluttering the bag around. I noticed some movement in the barley about 20 meters from me, so I crouched down and silently waded through, hoping to find my sister, and hoping that the sound of the wind would mask me. As I hoped for the sound of the wind, I heard something quite different, like a sort of wailing, a very faint and distant wailing far in the distance. I stopped and listened intently, and made a cup over my ears. The sound of the wailing merged with the whistling of the wind coming through the woods, almost like the sound of a kettle boiling. I crouched there listening for X amount of time, 30, maybe 40 seconds. My sister jumped up from hiding and ran to a different location, which made me jump out of my skin. That bag blew nearer to me and now was in my sight, just floating there. I began to be creeped out. It seemed like it was following me. I shouted to my sister that the game was over and that we were heading back inside. My gaze was fixed upon the black bag, which seemed so ominous. My sister appeared at my side. She looked up at me and I down at her. She knew that look. I wasn't joking around. I told her to go back to the house, which was just over the wall and 100 yards down the road. She obeyed, as she knew that tone I gave her. I made sure she got over the wall safely, and then I turned to where the bag was, or at least where it used to be. It seemed to move across the field in a zigzag pattern towards me. I froze with shock as I didn't know what to do, and all I could do was watch this bag come closer and closer. The wailing became louder and louder, like the sound of a shell shock. After what seemed like an eternity, the bag was in range of being able to distinguish what it was. It wasn't a bag. It was some sort of black robe, much like the Witch King from Lord of the Rings. Tattered and torn, the bottom of it stained. I stood there, mouth open. In terror, I watched this thing come towards me. This bundle of rags flowed across the field. The wailing became louder, and my heart began to pound, trying to escape my chest. Sweat flooded off of me. All I could do was watch this thing come closer and closer and closer. The bundle of rags stopped several meters in front of me, and the wailing had completely stopped. All I could hear now was my heartbeat in my ears, like some ancient primal drums of war thumping away. The bundle of rags rose from the ground and emitted a blood-curdling shriek, a piercing scream which deafened me briefly. I held my ears and felt the blood trickle out of them. A hooded entity filled the robes. It stood tall and thin, long white hair floating out of the hood. It then turned to me and looked right into my soul. I felt this sharp pain in my chest. I clutched my chest in agony and writhed on the ground. It let out the same deafening scream, and I noticed, through fighting back tears, that it was a woman. Pale and hollow she looked. It pointed at me with her long skeletal fingers, and then it pointed in the direction of my house. It then looked directly back into my eyes, and as quickly as it attacked me, it disappeared into a bundle of rags on the ground. I lay there in the earth, panting, sweating, and looking at the bloodstains on my hands. I lay there in pain and in fear. It was then I realized what I had just seen. The omen on bad news and death, the Banshee. It wasn't coming for me. It came as a warning. I had to get back to the house. I stumbled up from the earth and eventually ended up in the house. I found my sister standing in the kitchen, silent and in shock. She didn't hear me crash through the door. I startled her when I touched her on the shoulder. She looked at me in horror, tears streaking her face, speechless. She looked at me and then looked to the floor where my mother lay dead. Authorities report she died of a heart attack, but I knew what really happened. I can't fall back asleep. I don't even remember what woke me up. But now that I'm awake, I can't fall back asleep no matter how hard I try. Counting sheep doesn't seem to help. It wouldn't even be that bad, being awake in the middle of the night, if I could get up, but I can't move a muscle. My body is rigid like a corpse. Can't even wiggle so much as a toe, and not for the lack of trying. After the initial panic set in and passed, and I realized I wasn't dead, I racked my brain and tried to come up with an explanation for my immobility. I began to remember a lecture about dreams and sleep disorders in a psychology course I took freshman year, and that's what made me think about sleep paralysis, which might help explain why the only part of my body I can move are my eyes. Maybe if I paid attention more in class, I'd be able to figure out how to raise myself from this state. As it is, I'm stuck waiting here for one of my roommates to come check up on me in the morning. Doesn't make much for a plan, but it's all I got. Certainly helps stop the growing pains of fear that were spreading throughout my body, though in the pit of my stomach, I still feel uneasy. There's an ominous yet measured beep that I can just faintly hear, too soft to be a fire alarm or a carbon monoxide detector, and it has been going on long enough that it's definitely not someone's car alarm. It feels both close and distant at the same time, like it's by my side but just out of reach. Regardless, this isn't the source of my uneasiness. No, it's something else keeping me awake. Something else stirring in my chest, giving me this sense of dread. It's like something is in the room with me, but I can't quite see it. Everything looks a little blurry, like things are moving too fast. There are other sounds like the soft pitter-patter of feet around me, and just outside of my room I can hear what sounds like whispering. Since I don't live alone and the walls are pretty thin, this usually wouldn't be such a strange occurrence, even this late at night. However, these voices aren't familiar, and the murmurs, though soft, somehow sound urgent. While I want to decipher what they're saying, deep down I know that even this is not what has me on edge. It's something in the air. Something is off. As I'm trying to pinpoint what is making me feel so restless, the sounds of shuffling feet, faint whispers, and even that insistent beeping all begin to fade away. My vision swims and darkness begins to swirl around me, growing thicker. I can feel my chest tighten and my breath catch. I try to cry out, but no sound emits from my mouth, not a scream nor a squeak. I try desperately to move even an inch, but my body doesn't respond. It feels as though I'm being held down by invisible hands. I'm smothered by an infinite darkness and a deafening silence. The pangs of fear I'd suppressed before grow and spread through my body with a burning fever. The uneasiness that dwelled in the pit of my stomach is now full-blown terror. And just as I'm about to succumb to my fear and apparent demise, a bright light parts the sea of darkness, and I'm brought face to face with the woman. Her hair is ghostly white, which reaches out into an infinite black surrounding her like wispy tendrils. Her skin is so pale it's almost transparent. I feel like I could make out the bones beneath her skin if I strained my eyes hard enough, but it's not her hair or skin that has me captivated. It's her eyes, or the lack thereof. Where her eyes are supposed to be instead are just sunken black sockets. Staring at them, I feel as though I'm being sucked back into the never-ending void of black. With difficulty, I pull my eyes away from them. Looking down, I notice that she is draped in an alabaster dress that matches her long white hair. The dress, though once was obviously beautiful, now lies in tatters, clinging to her body like vines on a gnarled tree. I raise my gaze to meet hers yet again, but before I can even try to utter a word, she raises a withered finger and points directly at me. Her thin lips part, and she let out a low moan. As her mouth widens, the low moan begins to raise a pitch, like a kettle coming to boil. Her moan rapidly escalates into an otherworldly wail. Her maw has now become so impossibly wide. I shut my eyes in a desperate but futile attempt to block out the piercing sound. It continues for what feels like an eternity. I feel blood trickle out of my ears and down my neck. I hear my desperate wail reverberate in my skull, making my teeth rattle. Even with my eyes closed, I still see her ghostly visage looking at me. No, she's looking through me, at my very soul. When I finally open my eyes, it's not the oppressing darkness with the female spectre or even the familiarity of my room, but appears to be the inside of a hospital room. I try to move and I'm immediately jostled by a sharp pain in my chest. A sharp cry passes my lips and my hand automatically reaches towards the pain in my chest. After a brief moment, I realize I'm able to move again. I'm not allowed much time to reflect on my shock, however, as someone strides into my room at that moment. A pale man with a bald head looks down at me and smiles, showing off an impressively white set of teeth. He's dressed in a white overcoat and has a black dress shirt peeking out just underneath. I wouldn't try to move if I was you. Trust me, I'm a professional, he says with a mischievous wink. As he steps closer, I can make out a name on the badge pinned to his lapel. It reads Dawn, with 2 N's. I turn my head and am greeted by a now familiar beeping. The heart monitor is connected to my chest by tubes and wires I can't quite see. There's also an oxygen mask lying just by my head. The doctor seemingly reads my thoughts and explains I had quite the night. I was wheeled in by the paramedics last night after I'd collapsed in my room. One of my roommates had called 911. The shuffling of feet and the urgent voices all begin to make sense. You had a close call, he finished, still smiling. I begin to straighten up slightly and he hands me a small cup of water. After a few sips, I tell him about my nightmare. His smile never fades as I talk. Sounds like you dreamt of a banshee, he says when I finished. He explains when I give him a quizzical look. Ghastly spectras that let out the most blood-curdling cries. They're known as harbingers of death. His grin seems to grow wider as he talks, and I feel an uneasiness sprout in my chest. Despite their frightening appearance, they're merely warnings that death is around the corner. I began to cough and reach for my chest again.
You mortals, you build structures and even create professions just to delay the inevitable. A pointless venture, wouldn't you agree?
As I clutched at my chest and looked back at the small paper cup of liquid that I realize now is not water, the man's skin begins to fall away and he reaches a skeletal finger to pluck each of his eyes out. He removes his white coat, letting it fall to the floor, and pulls up the hood of the black robes he's now wearing. The creature looms over me and closes the lids of my eyes.
And I hope your next dream is a bit more pleasant.